Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
And this is the podcast where every week in season 2 of the podcast, we're reviewing weekly television from all over, from whenever.
Yeah, all over the world, whenever, as you said. This is not one of those podcasts where we are reviewing a wrestling TV show in order week after week after week. There's a lot of those out there, and they do a great job. On this podcast, we parachute in, we skydive in from 35,000 feet into weekly TV, and we have no idea what we're about to see. We have no idea what it's building to in most cases, even though we've seen some of these promotions before, obviously, being longtime wrestling fans. And we figure out, was this a good show? Did they build to anything? Did any of this make sense? And this week's show, this is one for the ages for me, a sort of alternate reality of my wrestling childhood, as I grew up watching Mid-South Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling, living in New Orleans. That's what we got on TV. This is just a little bit east. It's NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida in January of 1985. And Jeremy, this is the first time I've ever actually seen a full episode of NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida, as hard as that is to believe.
It's not hard to believe, because this is the same thing for me. This is the first time I've sat through an episode of Championship Wrestling from Florida. This obviously the territory it wasn't easy to get tapes unless you were in the trading scene back in the 80s, which I wasn't in. So that was,
and it wasn't on TV in either of you growing up in the Chicago area, me for a few years as a young child growing up in New Orleans and then moving back to Chicago. We did not get this TV, needless to say, in our areas.
No. So you might be wondering, how did we pick January 19th, 1985 to watch NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida? Well, that's easy. It's because we took thousands and thousands of weekly television episode titles from streaming services across the vast internet, dumped them all into what we call the randomizer. We fire up the randomizer. We say, pick us something to watch. It will pick it out. And then we sit here, we review it. It could be anything, like we said. We're parachuting in. We watch the show, we review it here, and for those of you who are Patreon subscribers, you can support the show, obviously, through patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. Those folks, they get bonus content, because sometimes the randomizer will pick something that's not a full show. Maybe it's a couple of matches. Maybe it's a one match. There's only one match available from the show. So when the randomizer picks some of those weird shows, we still watch them, but we watch them for bonus content for our Patreon subscribers who are supporting the show in the bonus content tier. There's multiple prizes you can select. You can even be the randomizer. You can produce a show. You can say, hey, Adam, Jeremy, I'd really want you to watch this show because it was important to me, or I think it'd be hilarious if you watch this show because it was so horrible.
Yeah, or I hate both of you and I want you to watch the worst wrestling that I've ever seen. It scarred me and I want it to scar you. That is also that's also a possibility. Really, with the Patreon bonus audio, those exclusive podcasts are even more the island of misfit toys than the free feed that you are listening to right now. If you've checked that out, if you listen, you already know some of the oddball stuff that we've interviewed on there. And that doesn't mean that it's not good. We've reviewed, I should say, some great stuff on there. The very first episode of the Patreon podcast is Ric Flair versus Barry Windham from 1987, a 5-star match. So that's just one example of the type of stuff you can find if you subscribe. But yeah, there's even more content and even more. We go to deeper and darker corners than we even do here to find content for you, the fine listener.
Head over to patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom to learn more about what's offered and how you can support the show. We appreciate it. We can't do it without you guys. And if you can't support us financially, of course, Just your word of mouth, telling your wrestling fan friends about us keeps the show going as well. WrestlingAtRandom.com, of course, is the website. It has the link to the Patreon. It has the links of all the ways to subscribe to this show, because subscribing to the free feed here as well keeps this show going. It helps us work the algorithm so others can find the show as well. All of our social media links as well available. The entire back catalog of all these free episodes.
That's what I was going to say. Our entire
season 1, where we didn't do
voluminous archive of 30 plus episodes in season 1. Quite a few episodes already in season 2 and ongoing. If you, as you always say, Jeremy, if you have not listened to them yet, they're new to you. It's evergreen content, not time sensitive, just waiting for you. If you're going to be driving cross country, if you've got a big work project and you need something to distract you while you're crunching those numbers, our audio is right there for you.
So let's deep dive into NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida, January 19th, 1985. It started as a territory of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, in 1961. Championship Wrestling from Florida had decades of success. Eddie Graham, Dusty Rhodes, among other stars, made this one of the most successful territories. Eddie Graham, the owner and booker for the territory, actually committed suicide in January of 1985, shortly after the episode that we review here today. By the mid-'80s, the promotion, like most territories, was losing money. Top stars continued going to Jim Crockett Promotions and the World Wrestling Federation. The territory would close down 2 years after the show we're reviewing tonight. The territory was closed for good in February 1987, merging with Jim Crockett Promotions. We open the show with a graphic that says Championship Wrestling from Florida with your host, Gordon Solie.
Yes, I was already happy when I heard that very 80s wrestling TV show style intro music and the screen alerting us that, yes, the Dean of Professional Wrestling Broadcasting, Gordon Solie, here much closer to his heyday than he was in 1995 on that Slamboree 95 review that we did in season 1, where, if you recall, Gordon Solie was surprise inducted into the WCW Hall of Fame, except for it wasn't actually a surprise because everything about wrestling is a work. Go back and listen into season 1 to find out more about that. But yes, Gordon Solie is here. He is behind a desk here at this studio, and I am already happy because I instantly remember, again, the pro wrestling of my youth. While it was not Championship Wrestling from Florida, it was territory wrestling, and that was the staple. Most TV shows were broadcast under this format of your play-by-play man, your host, behind a desk, guiding you through the proceedings for the next hour or so. Very happy to see that was the setup.
Gordon tells us that there's a match already in progress in the ring.
Yes.
It is Scott Mcgee versus Rocky King. Mcgee uses a few takedowns into headlocks each time, and
yeah, he's doing a lot of kind of amateur / pro wrestling, sort of dominating the control, you could say, of this match. He is dressed in basic black trunks and boots. Rocky King, on the other hand, brown tights, white boots, pretty basic gear here in 1985 in the Florida territory.
I noticed right away our referee is Bill Alfonso.
Yes,
that Bill Alfonso.
I noticed that as well. I think we both caught on to that before Gordon even told us. And then, yeah, that took me back to I believe the early 90s in WCW. Bill Alfonso would be a ref on the Florida shows, including Super Brawl 1. He was the ref in that Ric Flair Tatsumi Fujinami match. He would be a referee at times in WWF. And then obviously would go on to take quite the left turn and become the whistle-blowing, screaming, calling it right down the middle daddy manager of Rob Van Dam and Sabu.
Yeah, so this is 1985. How old was Bill Alfonso in ECW?
Yeah, he must have been very young here.
surprising that he had to be really young here because he had such a long career when you look at it here that he was.
Well, this is the earliest I'd ever seen Bill Alfonso as a referee, like calendar wise. This is the earliest, 1985 is the earliest I recall ever seeing him refereeing a match.
More amateur wrestling on the mat, mostly Mcgee just trying to pin the guy. Rocky King gets a hip toss, but gets caught in a backslide by Mcgee for the pin. A backslide for the victory. A handshake after, and that's our opening contest.
This kind of felt like a standby match, but it was at the beginning of the show. He joined in progress, and the standby was like maybe everybody wasn't there at the table yet, so they had to throw a match out. It's an interesting way to start a show, though, with a match in progress. That's not something you normally see. My biggest note about this was that Mcgee had a very professional mullet.
That he did. Another professional behind the desk, Buddy Colt, tells us that you can go to the matches in Orlando and be home in time for the Super Bowl.
Yes, they lay out the upcoming weekend's matches. They will be in Sarasota tonight, which was always interesting. Whenever you'd watch a wrestling show that was aired on Saturday, whether it be a Saturday morning show or if you watched NWA World Championship Wrestling, on Saturday nights on TBS, and like you'd be watching a show that was on from 5:05 to 7:05, and then they'd be telling you that like the guys you were seeing wrestling were going to be wrestling at the Omni tonight, and it was always just jarring as a kid. Not fully comprehending this was a tape show and kind of, they were a wink and a nod. But yes, he says that Ric Flair will be in Sarasota defending the NWA World's Heavyweight title tonight. And then there will be a 2 p.m. Super Bowl spectacular in Orlando at the Eddie Graham Sports Palace. Like you said, they say you can watch this show, go live, and then get home in time to watch the Super Bowl. Clearly in 1985, there were not the same concerns about not being able to call the Super Bowl if you didn't have the rights to it. They were not calling it the big game. Nothing like that. This was pre-litigious Super Bowl situation, I guess. The thing that so then also they start talking about upcoming events in Ocala, Florida, which the only thing I know about Ocala is whenever you drive through Florida, you always see the signs to get off on Ocala. It's one of those towns, I think. They also talk about a show coming up in Fort Pierce. Then we get Buddy Colt doing a solid for his good friend and broadcast colleague Gordon Solie as he holds up a book. They zoom in on the book, and it is in fact Master of the Ring by author Gordon Solie. At this point, they then say that you can get it at your bookstore or use something called .need or .mead to get the book. I don't understand. This clearly was not the internet here in 1985.
No,
I don't know if this
publisher.
was.
My guess was that was the publisher of the book. You have to contact the publisher.
I was hoping it was like a courier service or
I don't know. I could be wrong.
That's specialized payphone that they had in the studio that was only for wrestling fans to get books by Gordon Solie. I was intrigued, but not enough to do research on it.
Yes, Gordon Solie was less surprised to be there to plug his book than he was when he was introduced to the Hall of Fame.
Yes. Good point.
Sweet Brown Sugar says that Rocky King he's young, he's going to get better. Gordon tells us the boss man has arrived.
Yes, well, first they tell us that Ric Flair will be in action today on this very program, making a rare appearance here, wrestling on TV in Florida. So we have that to look forward to. As you mentioned, we also have the arrival of the boss man, whoever that is, at the Tampa airport coming up.
Thoughts are running through my head of who could the boss man be? And
I'm like, it's not the big boss man. We know that.
No,
we know he was like in the very embryonic stages of being Big Bubba Rogers, if that, in 1985. So, I wrote, here is the boss man, but I have no idea who this is going to be. I also, just before we get to that, I wanted to note again how much I love this format, as you have your trusted play-by-play host in Gordon Solie, and then he's got his two analysts, his two color commentators in Buddy Colt and Sweet Brown Sugar. And after we get this joint in progress match to start, it's just these three guys plugging upcoming events and talking some wrestling.
Yep.
And you immediately feel comfortable. You feel like you're watching a professional wrestling broadcast. You don't feel like you're watching like a variety show about pro wrestling. In some ways, it was like they opened the show doing a very early video podcast previewing their upcoming wrestling shows.
So we head to Tampa International Airport, where two dudes have a boombox tape player out, like a cassette deck boombox.
A very small boombox on a very long hood.
Yes, it's only a one-speaker boombox. It's not the two-speaker classic 80s boombox you'd think of.
A mono boombox. I don't know that you could call it a boombox. I think it was more of like a thud box.
Yes.
These two guys, I don't immediately recognize them. We learn later they're the Pretty Young Things.
Yeah, they're dancing a little in the parking lot to the music. I could tell one of the dudes was Coco Beware.
Yes.
But I didn't know who the other guy was. And as we're
Did
watching,
we ever determine that?
We will. I'll get to that later. We get a little two-seater propeller airplane kind of rolls up next to him. And when I say next to him, they're like right on the same tarmac runway right there. Like the plane just pulls up right next to the car. That's how tiny this plane is.
We're led to believe that like the plane landed with them just standing on the tarmac, and it landed and stopped just feet away from them, which doesn't sound particularly safe. But
this plane was such a tiny plane, no big deal.
Yes, children have played with smaller toy planes than this propeller vehicle that touched down here on the tarmac at Tampa International.
The door opens, and ravishing Rick Rude comes out of the plane.
This is ravishing Rick Rude in the very early stages of what he will become in terms of his look, everything. But yes, it is clearly Rick Rude. I write down, a plane has landed, some tall mullet guy, and oh my God, it's Rick Rude. Those are my notes.
I was so excited. He comes out of the plane. He's yelling. He's screaming. He says, the boss man is hot. And then all of a sudden, the boss man is revealed. And the boss man is Percy Pringle.
Yes. I write, again, so my notes are in full here. A plane has landed and some tall mullet guy, oh my God, it's Rick Rude. And oh my God, some round guy comes out of the plane, and it's all caps Percy Pringle. He is amazing.
Yes, I have no less than 10 exclamation points with Percy Pringle's arrival, because he gets out of the back of the tiny plane. Big man getting out of the tiny plane.
And maneuver his round body out of this very small square opening at the bottom of this plane that's so small it's hard to imagine it has a bottom or a top. It's that small. He is able to maneuver his way out, and he is cutting a promo before he even turns around getting out of this plane. He's talking about his mama. He's complaining about this plane. As he gets out, he says, "Mama don't want to see me like this," as he realizes he's on camera. He puts an umbrella up, and then he blames Gordon Solie for this.
Come here, boss man. Oh, no. I want to know what's going on. I'm sick and tired. What did you do to my jet? You took the plane out. You took the jet out. And you didn't put the hours down. They took it to the shop. And boss, you don't understand. Mama don't like me arriving like this. This man here thinks he's Sky King or something. Boss man, look at this thing. Look at this thing. Look at it. I'm not supposed to be riding the things like this. What do you think this is?
The umbrella up is amazing because we see a graphic as we go to commercial. And the graphic is just like a still of Percy Pringle holding this umbrella over his head with this crazed look on his face. And the commercial just says in big block letters, "The boss man is coming, ...
Well, and it was so great too, because it's like they basically went frame by frame and found the least flattering shot of the boss man, Percy Pringle, and then proceeded to use it not only as a graphic here, but for every time they went to commercial for the rest of the program. Which is great because it's just a hilarious image, and then it feeds into everything he's complaining about.
We will get to it by the end of this show. This is just going to be us talking about what an amazing performance by Percy Pringle.
We raved about him a little bit on the World Class show earlier this season, the World Class Championship Wrestling TV review from 1987. We saw a little bit of him, and we talked about how great he was there. Little did we know what we were in for here, as Percy Pringle, several years still away from becoming Paul Bearer. And that's been one of the revelations here on this podcast, is if you only know Percy Pringle as Paul Bearer, as that character in the WWF, boy, did you miss out on a lot.
Yeah, treat yourself and watch this show and see just what a super talent this guy was. And
which,
awesome
by
character.
the way, I just want to jump in. You can very easily find this show, at least as the time we're recording this. If you search the Championship Wrestling from Florida, and you search the date of the show, which you mentioned earlier in the podcast, you can find the show on YouTube.
After commercial break, we're back with Gordon Solie. He runs down upcoming cards again. So, like, they are hitting the promotion of local events hard every time coming in and out of commercial.
That's the entire point of this show, of syndicated pro wrestling. You are buying time in the local market. And why are you buying time in the local market? To build up interest in the shows that you are promoting coming up, to sell tickets and to make money. That was still here in 1985 in the waning days of as you mentioned, the territory system. And for a lot of reasons, that going away, that was still the format here, and that was still the goal behind it. We are told that on the 23rd at Fort Lauderdale Sunrise Music Theater, or as Gordon Solie called it, Musical Theater, there was an upcoming event which included Dutch Mantel and the Freebirds versus Crusher Khrushchev, Somebody Else, and Jim Neidhart. Also on that show, B. Brian Blair versus Jesse Barr. B. Brian Blair is the Florida champion. We'll get more on that later. Pez Whatley and Sweet Brown Sugar versus the Pretty Young Things. And Scott Mcgee versus Ravishing Rick Rude. At this point, the aforementioned pistol, Pez Whatley, still riding high 2 years after squashing the Road Warriors with his tag team partner, Jimmy Valiant. He cuts a promo here leading to this show on the 23rd.
If you want to know what Adam's talking about, you have to go back to season 1 and go back to the last Battle of Atlanta show from season 1. And that's a shocker. Pistol Pez Whatley is here. He's got a belt with him. And Sweet Sugar Brown, he ends up cutting a promo on Pringle. And then we go to the ring. So
first, the graphics department here at NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida struggled a bit on this afternoon or evening whenever this was filmed and then broadcast, as every time they essentially were trying to go to the graphic showing the details on this upcoming event. Instead, it would fade to a completely black screen. Yeah. And then after a couple seconds of uncomfortability of, okay, is the show off the air? Then the graphic would come up. He says something about, I'm not eating anything other than you know what and bubble gum, and I'm fresh out of bubble gum. That was what I believe Sweet Brown Sugar said.
Yeah, this wasn't great. To the ring, we get Dutch Mantel versus the Red Raider. But the graphic...
Not the Red Rooster. This is the Red Raider.
But the graphic just says the Raider on it.
Yes. Gordon Solie filled in the rest of the details here. And, oh boy, a lot to talk about from a fashion corner
standpoint. Great, because I have noted right here, quick fashion corner time. Here we go.
Dutch Mantel is like rail skinny, which is weird because he was never like earthquake size, but he was always, he was not a super thin guy. He is rail thin. He's wearing black tights with thin brown or red suspenders. He is trademark Dutch Mantel, covered in body hair from head to toe. He's wearing a hat, a cowboy hat, and he has Shoe Baby, his whip, which, if you recall, we've on previous episodes you were just so amused by Shoe Baby, as was I, his named whip.
And what I was not amused by is the look of suspenders, no shirt, tons of body hair. It was quite a gross look. It was
Dutch Mantel turned to 11.
Now, the Raider is wearing black and red with a red mask, reminding us, giving us visions of the Super Invader from
Red Raider and Super Invader. What the Raider Invader connection.
It was getting me tongue tied, and that was what I was thinking of. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think Red Raider had a better look because this was a legit mask. It wasn't a sock over his head. Granted, the physique of said Red Raider couldn't compare to that of Hercules Hernandez wearing a red sock on his head in the Super Invader era, but it's actually one of my favorite things about the show we'll get to throughout it is that, with one exception, the jobbers on this show, they are gloriously jobber-like.
Oh, yes.
Like, they are so unathletic, completely devoid of charisma, any even hint of being impressive physically in any way whatsoever, which is everything you want out of a man playing that role. So here we are with Dutch Mantel and the Red Raider about to lock up.
Yeah, not much to say about this match as Mantel hits a couple of shoulder blocks, headlock on the Raider. Mantel
he hits a vertical suplex.
I have that right here.
Solie hitting his broadcasting high spot early on in the show. A vertical suplex.
He follows up the suplex, drops an elbow, gets the 3 count.
This was maybe 40 seconds.
Is right there with him.
No question about that. Mantel goes into a vertical suplex. Has the Red Raider back to the canvas once again. Mantel off the ropes, down across the chest muscles. Mantel gets the 3 count. Dutch Mantel gets the 3 count on the Red Raider in short order. Goes over to the corner now to collect his hat and Shoe Baby.
Jesse Barr, former Florida heavyweight champion, cuts a promo.
Oh, I have a lot to say about Jesse Barr, cutting promos.
Let me tell you who he is first, in case you're not familiar with Jesse Barr. He's the son of wrestling promoter Sandy Barr and the older brother of wrestler Art Barr.
Yeah, so Jesse Barr was a mainstay then, one could infer, of the Portland wrestling scene.
That's correct. And he also had a run in the WWF as Jimmy Jack Funk. So he says Ric Flair is one of his greatest friends.
And I write down in all caps, I do not believe him.
Neither did I.
He starts this promo. He says he has taken over Florida. And then I believe this is a direct quote. He says, the whole Florida state, Florida wrestlers,
A lot of that.
This man, and we will hear from him and see him multiple times throughout this show. He is incapable of stringing more than 2 words together without tripping over himself. It is unbelievable. And we'll get to it later. The juxtaposition of him and one other man on this show standing side by side is just...
One of his greatest friends. You're talking about one of his greatest friends. Yeah, we'll get there later.
He shows us a black and white picture, like an 8x10 that you would get like from an autograph signing. It is of Wild Bill Irwin, who he says is one of his associates.
Because Ric Flair is out defending the world title. He's around the world defending this title. So he needs a friend that's around more, and that's Wild Bill Irwin and this black and white photo. Jesse Barr says Irwin is going to kick Mantel's butt. And Barr, he confronts Mantel. He pokes Mantel in the chest.
And this is, by the way, this is all at the broadcast desk. This is all at the announced location, which is where anything that's not happening in the ring, all these confrontations that we talk about, they all happen at the desk.
Barr pokes Mantel in the chest and says, I'm giving you fair warning. Mantel shoves him. says, I'll handle you later. Mantel says, if Irwin's looking for him, fine. He's not hard to find.
Yeah, he says, I like people to look for me because I'm not hard to find. Gordon Solie then says, that's a natural fact. And even here, this is just a preview of things to come with, I guess the theme of this could be, everyone's more charismatic than Jesse Barr.
Yes.
As Dutch Mantel seems like Ric Flair next to Jesse Barr here. Dutch Mantel comes across like the biggest star in the history of pro wrestling in comparison to this Jesse Barr character.
No, just this little promo that he cut at the end blew away the whole soliloquy by Barr that preceded it. Absolutely.
Well, and Barr too, like he has this trying to be Ric Flair look too. His hair isn't blonde, it's brown, but it's like the same haircut. He's got a suit on, he's got the dark sunglasses. But then after Gordon Solie says it's a natural fact, what do we get? That graphic again of Percy Pringle looking ridiculous, and it says the boss man is coming. From there, though, I don't know how much you want to get into the next thing that happens, but I do think
is commercials.
Yes,
hold on. I do want to talk about some of these commercials
because again, we're watching this off of someone uploaded this to YouTube, so the commercials, some of the commercial breaks, they are still left in, and
thank goodness they are, because 1985 commercials. Holy cow! We see a commercial for a movie called The Ninja Mission.
Well, before that, the first commercial in this break, it sets, dare I say, the tempo, which is the name of the product. This is I don't know.
It's an antacid.
It's an antacid called Tempo. And throughout it, it has people aggressively calling out Rolaids and Maalox and Tums.
That's right. The what we learned is that commercials in the 80s were all about calling out your competition and trying to bury the we'll get a dandruff commercial later.
Oh yeah, we get a lot of them. Yeah, but then after the Tempo commercial, we get it flashes on the screen. It says, quote, "They are the most awesome fighting warriors in the world." We get more similar things like that on the screen. And as you said, it is a promo for a film called The Ninja Mission.
I immediately paused the show, texted my wife, and said, I've got a movie for movie night for us later tonight. We're watching The Ninja Mission from 1985. But I had to revise that text later when I saw a different movie ad. Had to bump that one to the top.
We also learned that you can get $5,000 off your Volvo from Gold Coast Volvo. Well, so that was good to know. I filed that away for the next time I need to get a car.
Wait till there's plenty of car ads to talk about later.
Oh, yeah. Then we get a commercial. And the only way I can describe this is there's a teenage girl. She is standing like next to a store. It's raining. She's trying not to get rained on. Then a teenage boy in like a high school letter jacket runs up to her. They look at each other. Then we see a variety of deodorants on the screen. And then we get the tagline, "Nothing feels as good as love." 1985,
so
everybody.
Weird. That commercial was weird. Buddy Colt welcomes the Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts.
Not Michael Hayes. He calls him the ostentatious Michael Hayes, and there's never been a more apt description on a pro wrestling show, as Michael Hayes is wearing this amazing blue jacket. There's multiple tones of blue. There's multiple materials happening here. There's something red and furry around his neck that I can't figure out if it's a scarf, if it's a boa, if it's part of his jacket. He is looking quintessentially Michael Hayes here.
Now, if 1985 was a person, it was Michael Hayes.
That is exactly true.
So he's plugging the cage match with the Russians, and then we're told that Bam Bam Terry Gordy's coming to Florida. JJ French, guitarist from Twisted Sister, will be there as well.
Is that a real person?
That's a real person. And,
okay. He's going to be in Miami.
That's a big name drop. That's a big name drop because Twisted Sister,
especially in 1985,
huge hit song. Yeah, We're Not Gonna Take It, 1985 here, and JJ French will be there.
This promo, again, is building up the loop. They're talking about Ocala. They're talking about Sarasota. They're pontificating about Miami, as you said. So it is, again, a hard sell here for Michael Hayes, trying to get people out to go out to the shows.
Now, they mentioned that Terry Gordy is coming. Where is he coming from? We find out here because we cut to a video promo by Terry Gordy, and he's being interviewed by Mark Lawrence. So
yes!
I've seen enough world class now on this podcast that I knew exactly where Terry Gordy was when I saw Mark Lawrence holding that microphone for him. He's in Dallas.
I got so excited when I saw this. I wrote, "Oh my God, it's Mark Lawrence."
Yes.
Again, we had just, if you don't know who he is, go back and listen to our 1987 World Class podcast. The best way I can describe him is the youngest man with the oldest voice. He's fantastic at his job. But yes, he's interviewing Terry Bam Bam Gordy here, ostensibly in the locker room of the Sportatorium in Dallas, as Terry is talking about that he is on his way to join his friends, his brothers in Florida. And he says that his brothers are already there. He says he don't mind if it's in the Okefenokee swamps or anywhere. He's on his way. He's also wearing a sweet Bad Street USA t-shirt.
I had one of those shirts, and he says a lot of stuff, but really just says nothing. And I loved every minute of it.
But he was being Terry Gordy, so it was
so
totally
Terry
fine.
Gordy. Yeah, it was great. He ended the promo by saying, "We live in the last house on the right."
Yes.
The best
The
part.
other thing too is Terry Gordy was pretty damn young here.
Yeah.
He was, let's see, let me do some. Well, yeah, he was only 24 years old here.
Wow. Yeah, I wish we could have seen him wrestle.
Actually, not even 24 yet. He was 23. He wouldn't turn 24 for several more months.
The best part of this was having Bad Street USA playing underneath the interview while both Hayes and Roberts were talking. And when Gordy was talking, they kept Bad Street USA playing underneath the entire time.
Yes. Very happy to not have some sort of dub situation there.
U.S. Tag Team Champions, the Young Bloods versus Ed Siegel and Randy Barber.
Well, there's an issue here because the graphic said Ed Siegel and Randy Barber. Gordon Solie said Paul Garner and Randy Barber, and continued to call the men Paul Garner and Randy Barber throughout this match. These guys, oh my God.
This is
Barber,
how we like our jobbers right here.
Oh, yes. Barber, I write, is in my notes, there's just such a jobber. Balding hair, terrible physique, blue trunks. Again, everything you want about a guy in this role, but he will. Have no fear. There will be a guy that fits this role even better later on in this show.
Now, Randy Barber looks like if you showed up to high school one day, you had a substitute teacher, and the substitute teacher was telling the class something interesting about himself, and he said, "I'm a jobber pro wrestler for Florida Championship Wrestling," and they'd be like, "No way, Mr. Barber." Yeah, that it absolutely looked like that's who this guy is in his day job.
I was going to say he looks like the substitute teacher for the substitute teacher.
So, Mark and Jay Youngblood, they whip him into the ropes, and Barber cannot hit the ropes. He took about 50 steps to get to the ropes.
Well, that's the other glorious thing about the jobbers from this era is that not all of them were particularly well trained or trained at all, which led to you would think if you're a younger wrestling fan that hasn't watched a lot of territory wrestling or even post territory where wrestling shows were still mostly squash matches, you might think these are entertaining, a match that only goes maybe a minute or two, non-competitive. There is so much enjoyment to derive out of all the things that can and potentially do go wrong in these matches. And that was just a small example.
Yeah, watching Barber hit the ropes. Good God. B. Brian Blair is on commentary for this match. Quick tags in and out by the Youngbloods. Like a move, tag. Like they were in and out quickly. A headlock by Jay on Barber. His partner comes in, and Jay jumps up and puts on head scissors on the other opponent. So he's got one guy in the headlock, he's got the other jobber in a head scissors, and while he's holding them both, he takes them both over with it. This was a fun spot.
And it's a classic Ricky Steamboat spot as well. And you wonder if it's something that in the Young Blood Steamboat team that they sort of cross-pollinated with that move. But yeah, very cool to see, something I'd like to see come back in modern wrestling. We then get a war dance and a jumping chop.
Chops all around.
And then a huge lariat, I believe, from Jay Youngblood, tags in Mark.
Wait! Before we talk about this clothesline here, when Gardner comes off the ropes, he walks as slowly as possible into this clothesline. It looked like he wanted no part in getting hit with that clothesline.
Yes, this he was not interested in taking this clothesline. If this was if he was a substitute teacher, the bell had already rung and he was on his way home here. But he still had to eat it. He ate this lariat. Jay made him pay for his delay in getting there in time for this. He eats it, like I said. Then Mark hits sort of a flying, twisting splash, bouncing off the ropes. Gets the win. Again, a squash match that lasts less than a minute. And again, as we go to commercial, we get the Boss Man is coming on screen with that great graphic again.
Yeah, these jobbers were awful, but they were awful in the best way possible.
Yes.
And the Young Bloods were, as Gordon Solie described them, perpetual motion.
That is an accurate description. When you can have multiple tags in and out in a match that lasts less than a minute, perpetual motion is exactly the right description.
All right, now these local car commercials were amazing. A new GMC pickup truck was $7,511. And it had too many balloons on the truck, and it floated away. This was great stuff.
It did. It literally, we see the truck levitate into the air, and it is high in the sky. I expected to collide with a plane. I was very concerned. I assume air traffic control was warned before this commercial was filmed. This is for GMC truck dealers, and clearly all the dealerships here in the Florida area were trying to outdo each other with these commercials. We then get a commercial for Waterbed City.
Yes.
You texted me when you saw this commercial, and it just jogged your memory about how much you wanted a waterbed. As a child, I remember having a friend whose family had a waterbed, and if you had told me we could have, your parents, they can either buy a mansion or you can stay in the apartment you're in, but you can get a waterbed, I would have chosen apartment with waterbed.
Every single time. That's the correct answer. Waterbed City was having a sweet sale, and I'm watching this commercial. It took me back. Like you said, I paused it to text you because there is nothing I wanted more in the 80s than a waterbed. And my little apartment that we lived in was on the second floor. So my parents wouldn't let me have a waterbed. Now, they were also not going to pay to have a waterbed.
Yeah.
That was big. That was a big expense at that time. But
even with the sweet sal, it was still a big expense in 1985.
Yeah, so there was no way I would ever get a waterbed, but there's nothing I wanted more than a waterbed. And I remember, I had friends that had waterbed, and
that made it worse.
And it totally made it worse. You would go there and be like, God, this is how you're living. Just wow, it was a different level. Now
it was a status symbol. Like, I can't think of anything more tangible in my childhood as far as we just haven't reached that level as a family than going to someone else's house and them having a waterbed.
No, and as a 40-year-old now, the thought of sleeping on a waterbed, I would be in nothing but pain with the lack of support that you get in what a terrible. But as a child, it's all you ever wanted, just to float around in the bed. This is awesome.
Well, the funny thing too is the one thing as a child that would be so appealing about having a waterbed would be able to jump onto the waterbed.
Of course.
Which is really the one thing you can't do with a waterbed because you will rupture the waterbed. And otherwise, if you've never been on one, thinking back on it now, it's insane that it seemed like a good idea because you are just floating on rippling water.
It's a bag of water. It's not a mattress. It's a bag of water.
It's a bag of water contained by thin sheets. And just imagine, unless you are a person who sleeps like you are dead, imagine even slightly tossing or slightly turning, and then the undulations of a wave kicking you off the bed onto the floor.
The sounds of nothing but sloshing as you move in the bed. And
also, imagine like waking up in the middle of the night and being like, oh God, I feel like I need to use the bathroom. And then you are laying in nothing but water.
And you had
that is not going to be a pleasant experience trying to get out of there and make it to the bathroom.
You couldn't just roll out. You had to like climb out of there, like swim against the water. And like you're
like salmon swimming against the current.
Yeah, the edge of the bed was like this vinyl, padded vinyl, like the ends of a blackjack table or a craps table, where it's got that around the frame of the bed, keeping the bag of water in there with your sheet on it. So
it's an amazing idea. Like when you actually think back on it, it is incredible that like this was conceived and sold, and there are people who liked it. But I guess
I wanted it so bad. I watching it
there
again.
were adults who liked it and thought it was a good idea. I'm not surprised that children would like it, because like as a kid, not many things sound more appealing than laying in a big bag of water masquerading as a bed. But that an adult chose this to spend their hard-earned money on, it's certainly a decision. There are other things, though, in this commercial break that we still have to get to.
Sure.
Something called Network One low-cost long-distance calling, which is as much a product of its time as it sounds.
Yes, it saved you money, long distance calling. It sounded like you were next door even when you were across the country. But what's best is it saved you connection fees.
Yes.
So things in 1985 still exist today. Random weird phone fees on your cell phone bill were just as common in 1985 as well.
This felt like the equivalent of like the regional sports fee on your cable bill. But here in 1985, we then get a commercial for a movie. This movie is called Tomboy.
Rated R.
Rated R. And this may be like the most sexist, misogynistic thing I've seen on any pro wrestling show we've watched yet for this podcast. And just imagine that. We review pro wrestling, a lot of it from the 80s and 90s on this podcast. And yet this commercial in which this young girl calls herself, she's a tomboy, and then she's having to prove that because she's a tomboy, she is also still a woman. It's so much worse than I even described it.
No, it's horrible. The logo for the movie has a screw for the letter T and a wrench for the letter Y in Tomboy, and it did have what a lot of things in the 80s had, and that was an epic theme song.
Oh, yes.
And I did text the wife shortly after watching this and said, change of plans, scrapping the ninja movie. Movie night tonight, we're watching Tomboy, rated R.
What about a double feature?
After commercial.
Yeah, somehow we survived this commercial break.
This one was
made
epic.
It through.
Oh, it was so good.
We made it through to the other side, where Gordon Solie, very comfortably seated at his desk, tells us that B. Brian Blair has been working with the Tampa Police League to organize wrestling teams, and he's going on and on about this, and I'm begging someone to interrupt him. And thankfully, not just someone, but the boss man, Percy Pringle, is here to interrupt the soliloquy.
So we didn't have to hear about this statewide tournament. Percy Pringle interrupted. His back,
and he's
to
not
the camera.
alone.
Well, first he's got his back to the camera, and he's not even paying attention to the people at home right now. He's interrupting. The back is to the camera. He's introducing himself to Buddy Colt because he's a gentleman. And then he turns to the camera to introduce the Pringle Dynasty.
And by the way, we have not done it yet on this podcast. I know we did on the World Class show that we reviewed. But if you have never seen Percy Pringle, the former or the future, I should say, Paul Bearer in this character, basically take everything you know about Paul Bearer and make it the reverse negative, both in terms of hair color, clothes, demeanor. He's just the opposite of what you know about the guy Paul Bearer.
These dynasty members included Ravishing Rick Rude, the Missing Link.
I freaked out when I saw the Missing Link because the Missing Link was one of my childhood favorites in World Class, along with, we've talked about before, Iceman King Parsons and the Von Erichs. I loved the Missing Link character. And this is one of those moments when I'm watching this show where it's like, wow, yeah, this is the alternate reality wrestling of my childhood, where, the territories that I watched, now leaving that territory, going into the next one just a state or two over that I did not see. I was so excited to see the Missing Link.
And of course, the Pretty Young Things, who are Coco Ware and Norvell Austin.
This is an amazing collection of people, such a disparate group as far as look. I don't know that I've instantly fallen in love with a stable and a faction more than I did with the Pringle Dynasty here on this program.
Yeah, every time Rick Rude would pop in front of the camera, he's fixing his hair in the camera like it's a mirror. Every time. That joke never got old. I loved it every single time.
Fixing his hair, fixing his mustache. At one point, unbuttoning the couple bottom buttons of his shirt to show off his abs. Like he's doing this. Percy Pringle is screaming at the broadcast booth, not even facing the camera. Missing Link is just stomping and stalking all around the table with his black tufts of hair, his face painted green with black around his eyes, just a total madman.
And then he's a total madman, except also business casual because he's wearing like a black polo and black pants,
which is what makes him even more disturbing.
If you are a champion, if you have a belt, these guys will take it away.
He has a great line before that where he says, "Starting now, everything is going right."
Apparently, Pringle's mother is financing this with her wealth.
Yes. He says, "With my precious mother behind us." There's at one point, I can't remember whether it's this promo or one later, where he talks about the hierarchy of the Pringle Dynasty, and he points out that at the top,
his mother,
at the top of the hierarchy, is his precious mother.
He throws a fit because they are not on the schedule to compete. Gordon Solie is the straight man to Pringle's insanity.
So good here.
And it was awesome. Yeah.
He takes a look at his notes. Percy Pringle's talking about how we're going to wrestle on the show. Solie takes a look at his notes and says, "None of these men are on my notes." And then Percy flips out and says, "This is the third time this has happened. You will see one of these men today." And then Gordon Solie, as we go away from this scene, says, "That Missing Link is something else."
This was a great tantrum by Percy Pringle. I loved every minute.
Unreal. My thought as the show went along was that Percy Pringle is an exponentially better Jim Cornette than Jim Cornette, right down to the whole mother thing.
That's a great comparison. Yeah. Jesse Barr cuts a promo about the I Quit match he's having.
Is that what he does?
Brian Blair in Miami. Now, I don't know if it's just having to follow Percy Pringle or if it's just Jesse Barr is this bad.
It is.
He is not a good promo at all. This was terrible.
He has no presence. He has no confidence in what he's saying. I would make the argument that he may be, and maybe it's because we get him so many times in this show, he may be the worst promo guy that we've heard on any of these podcasts that we've done in 2 seasons now.
Yeah, for someone who gets a push, who's the Florida champion,
who's close friends with Ric Flair in storyline.
Yeah, so if for someone who's got the push like he's got, he's by far the worst promo.
I was begging for Brian Adias to be a top heel here, just to somehow give us even just a slight, just slight bit more of something than we were getting from Jesse Barr.
We get a Brian promo, but it's from B. Brian Blair, Mr. B. Brian Blair. The
sweet mustache, by the way.
It is, and his promo, he's very slick, he's very smooth. And he comes off sounding like a politician, which is funny because that's exactly what he is nowadays. So just a totally fine explanation from B. Brian Blair.
Yeah, it was a perfectly fine pro wrestling promo. He says he represents the people of Florida, talks about the I Quit match, says one of us will quit and it won't be me.
A young Crusher Khrushchev, who's Barry Darso, he cuts a promo about Russia without attempting a Russian accent at all, which I always love.
It's good to know that was still happening or not happening, I guess, in 1985. He has like some sort of rope-like thing around his neck. He's wearing a black Russian hat. He has a masked man next to him who apparently is Cuban because we're told this is the Cuban connection. And this man is saying that Russia and Cuba are number one.
The Freebirds cut another promo.
Which means not only do we get more of Michael Hayes, we get another Michael Hayes outfit, which I always approve of. It's here that I note that he has the most mesmerizing feathered blonde hair you've ever seen, particularly when juxtaposed with a dark black beard. He's wearing a pink sleeveless shirt, and he may actually look more 1985 than he looked earlier. This is more of his... I would say this is like his Miami Vice guest star look, somewhere around that.
Well, you know something, Gordon? I'm not going to sit out here and rehash what happened last week at Sunrise. Everybody knows, especially me, and especially this head of mine. But like I said before, I don't really worry about getting my head busted open, because when we used to go for chicken at the table, you'd get your head busted open just to get the last piece. This ain't gonna be my last piece of you, because that's right, they're talking about making it to Miami, where you're gonna have to get through Sunrise and all six in the ring, buddy, and Dutch Mantel by my side. We're talking about Texas Tornado. We were born in a tornado.
Hey, we go to commercial, and we get a dandruff shampoo commercial. And I mentioned it earlier, in the 1980s, that seemed to be quite a war between Selsun Blue and Head and Shoulders and these other dandruff shampoos here. Selsun Blue was not pulling any punches in this commercial. They were coming after the competition.
They were the tempo of this commercial, harkening back to earlier. The only thing I was disappointed in this hour is that we didn't get like Aquafresh shooting on Crest and Colgate. I was hoping for that in the next commercial break, but it didn't happen.
We see a commercial for Super Bowl 19 because Miami is in the Super Bowl. That's why it's being pushed so hard. You can go to the wrestling show and be back in time for the Super Bowl. The Miami Dolphins were in the Super Bowl 19. However, they did get destroyed by the San Francisco 49ers in that Super Bowl. Back in the ring, we see just a geek in the ring, and then we cut to Solie, who tells us that we're waiting on the arrival of Ric Flair, the world's heavyweight champion.
Yes, he says it's a rare opportunity to see Ric Flair here in a non-title match. And then Ric Flair shows up at the broadcast desk, and he has an amazing pink robe, which is, very on point, because he then says he is the most fashionable athlete. Jesse Barr is out there with him, and Ric Flair, being as selfless as ever, says that he's with one of the best in the world, Jesse Barr. He also says that Gordon Solie is looking classy as ever, which I liked. And this is where I noted, I know we've talked about this in the past on this podcast, but this blows every other instance of this out the water. You have never seen a bigger charisma chasm than between these two men, Ric Flair and Jesse Barr. It's not the Grand Canyon. It's like whatever the giant, exponentially bigger version of the Grand Canyon is on Mars. It's that level of difference here, falling off a cliff from Ric Flair to Jesse Barr.
Especially when they're standing on the same stage together here.
And talking.
And Jesse Jesse Barr is following him around, and he comes off like such a loser. And they're not, it's like they're trying to like play up that he's not as cool, but trying to be friends with Rick. But like, it's not that. It's just that he comes off just like a real loser. Like,
yes, he comes across like such a low rent sycophant.
Yes,
and that's not what they're trying to do here. The idea is that by being with Ric Flair, Jesse Barr is supposed to get a little bit of that Ric Flair magic and be their local Ric Flair, and it is not working at all.
I've always been considered the most fashionable athlete in the world today. So because I'm the world champion, and because I'm standing here with one of the greatest wrestlers alive today, Mr. Jesse Barr, I thought that I'd do something a little special for all the wrestling fans in the state of Florida, and that's wrestle on your program today. Now, I feel sorry for this young gentleman because today I really feel like making an example of somebody. Gordon, you're looking as classy as ever, brother.
Well, thank you so very much. Ric Flair, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, going toward the ring at this time.
Ric Flair versus Jack Hart. No relation to the famous Hart family, right?
Do you know who Jack Hart is?
No.
You did not realize this as you were watching? It's Barry Horowitz.
No, I did not.
Yes,
I didn't look it up.
That is the name. That is the name that Barry Horowitz wrestled under before he was Barry Horowitz. He was Jack Hart. The second I saw him in there, I was hyped because if we were going to get a good match on this show, it was going to be Ric Flair versus Barry Horowitz. When you talk about your tiers, your levels, the pyramid of jobbers in pro wrestling in the 80s and 90s, standing at the absolute peak, the summit, the top of that pyramid is Barry Horowitz. And here was a young Barry Horowitz as Jack Hart getting ready to wrestle Ric Flair in 1985. I was hyped for this.
Flair's yelling from the ring to Gordon Solie at the desk.
Which is one of my favorite things on this show in general is that guys don't wait for the mic to be given to them.
No.
They will, whether it's Percy Pringle at the booth yelling at Gordon or hear Ric Flair yelling to Gordon from the ring. I love that you hear their unmiked, unamplified voice in the studio. Again, it just adds to more, more legitimacy.
He says they used to call me the greatest, but now they have to redefine the word. Flair puts him in a headlock, takes him over. Head scissor counter by Hart, and Flair has a smirk on his face. Like, okay, all right.
Hart is fired up, and at this point, Jesse Barr, who is on commentary because that's what this show needs more of, is him talking. He says, and I quote after the sequence, "Look at the spleed." I assume he was talking about the speed and was not talking about either man's spleen. One will never know.
Flair takes him down. He rides Hart on the mat. Hart tries a hammerlock, but Flair counters easily and pulls the hair for good measure. He's already countered the hold, but pulls the hair anyway, just because he's Ric Flair.
He's redefining the word great, and that's one way to do it. The thing I noted right away is that this Ric Flair here against Jack Hart / Barry Horowitz in 1985, this is the Ric Flair we had in 1984 versus Ricky Steamboat on that NWA Boogie Jam show from season 1. He is doing a lot of amateur stuff.
Yep.
He's doing it very confidently, aggressively, and forcefully. His front chancery, it's not just a rest hold. He is grinding it. He's using it to control, to take Hart down and use, 3/4 Nelsons to get pins. I loved seeing this Ric Flair. I thought Flair looked out of this world awesome here.
So good. He's Flair with a big chop, backs him into the corner for some vicious chops and forearms. This was aggressive Flair here. And then we get the front chancery you just described.
We also had a Ric Flair Beal out of the corner. And I guess that's redundant. It's a Beal is a hip toss out of the corner. So a Ric Flair Beal. When I say that, I mean, he delivered it, which is shocking because the only thing that Ric Flair takes more of than the getting slammed off the top rope is getting Bealed, whether it be by Ricky Steamboat or Sting. That happens in every match. Here, he was the one dishing that move out.
Flair rolls him over, only a 2 count. Flair wants to make an example of him. Hart with that hip toss and a drop kick. Flair begs off in the corner for a second. Hart comes over to lay the boots in, but Flair's had enough messing around here. He chops him again. Drops the knee to Hart's forehead.
Well, again, that's another, like, a Ric Flair growth chart. I was wondering, as he was setting up this knee, I'm like, have we hit the point where he does the rolling knee drop? Or is this still where he just does the knee drop and doesn't roll through? This was still before that dividing line, just a regular knee drop, but still very good here from Ric Flair.
He begins yelling, "Come on, get up!" And they trade shots, but the chops are too much for Hart. Big suplex by Flair. He struts. He puts on the figure four, and Hart
He
quits.
says, "Now we go to school." Classic Ric Flair.
Ric Flair woos and celebrates with Barr after the match. This was everything you want in a Ric Flair squash match. It lived up to my expectations.
Yes, and also classic Ric Flair squash match, particularly when he's in there with a capable guy. He gave him enough that you could see that, Jack Hart here was a quality professional wrestler, but super intense from Flair. I also liked just one of the little things he did, just a little transitional move, but he would do this thing often where he'd be face to face with his opponent. He'd kind of grab them, like throw the one arm aside and then throw a standing knee to the ribs. Just very different. You don't see anyone else do it. And I forgot, it's one of those moves Flair would use here in the mid 80s. Also noteworthy that here in the Florida territory, Gordon Solie made sure to refer to this as the Eddie Graham figure four leg lock.
After commercial, oh God, Solie reads the missing kids report. Jesus.
Yeah, this was grim. It's good that they do this. Like it's laudable that they were doing this, getting the word out. But yeah, we go from the bright vibrancy of professional wrestling, and then yes, we learn about two children in their late teens that have each gone missing.
I tried to look them up on the internet to see if either kid was found. I could not find any information whatsoever, positive or negative. So just a missing kids report here. This was, in the 80s you had, missing kids on your milk cartons, and you had it here in your local shows to get the word out. This was, how you did things pre Facebook, social media,
pre-Amber Alerts,
pre-Amber, yeah. So
it was also, as I watched this, I thought there's only one man that could pull this off on a professional wrestling show, like coming out of pro wrestling, coming into this segment, and then pitching right to the ring, and it is Gordon Solie. He handled this impossible segment very well. He reads this, he talks about the situation, and then he just says, "Now let's go to the ring." And then we go to the ring, and it is Pistol Pez Whatley, the Southern champion. So we learned what championship belt he was holding earlier, taking on Mike Golden.
Yes, it's all Pez Whatley early. Whatley's working over a headlock, and then Rick Rude on the mic talks about being a professional arm wrestling champion.
Yes.
He does that gross thing you just mentioned where he opens his shirt, keeping one button open and then showing his abs in the sleaziest way possible.
The camera either goes full screen or it might have just been like an inset, which is even better. Then out of nowhere, we hear Percy Pringle, and he's screaming, and this is a direct quote, "Why is this pistol man not wrestling one of my men?" I had to pause it. I could not type. I was laughing too hard. My notes would not work if I did not take a moment here to compose myself.
So I was laughing at that moment too, but then I busted out laughing right afterward again because Rude he shows up at the bottom of the screen at ringside. And he just pops into the screen and he starts checking his hair in the hard camera again. Yes. And I'm howling with laughter.
Yes, Rude is at ringside, just appears, and this is like a wide shot, and he's looking up at the hard cam and just checking himself out. Just like if Percy Pringle wasn't so great here, this whole show would be about how incredible Rick Rude was. But which tells you how great Percy Pringle was, that could eclipse those moments from Rick Rude. Percy, while all this is going on, Percy Pringle is saying that, Missing Link will be on. He's talked to the promoter and he will be on. He will wrestle 2 men. And at this point, we get the inset of Percy screaming while Pez and Rude are jawing on the floor. Pez gets back in the ring. Golden tries to beat him down, but Pez pretty much no-sells it like it's Road Warrior Hawk. Hits a backdrop, hits a drop kick. This is, like you said, when Rude starts checking himself out in the hard cam. Then out of nowhere, Pez hits a beautiful gut wrench suplex. Like, as far as in-ring stuff, that might have been my favorite thing of the entire show.
Gut wrench suplex by Pez, a flying clothesline by Pez Whatley, and he gets the win.
A flying clothesline that Gordon Solie calls, and I quote, a judo lariat. A judo chop is one thing. If Jim Ross would say, other guys would say, but how would you arrive at calling this a judo lariat? How do you put those 2 words together? Judo lariat.
And then I hear the screams of Percy Pringle saying, wrestle one of my men, not some jabroni.
And then
Pez screams, call your mama.
Yes, yeah. Pez has he says that I don't make the schedule. The distinguished NWA does. He says he'll wrestle Percy. Percy says he's not a wrestler and is just crazy here. He's great. Get the call your mama thing. Then we go to commercial. Star Search. Wow. I completely forgot about the existence of Star Search. It was pretty much the 80s forerunner to American Idol or America's Got Talent.
Yep.
And this was a viewer sweepstakes, a $100,000 sweepstakes for Star Search 85. You could watch the show, and I don't know if some code flash on the screen or something. I don't know if this was like combined with Publishers Clearinghouse. There's a lot of 80s happening.
A lot of Ed McMahon. There's a lot of crossover there. Carvel ice cream commercial where they explain
flying saucer ice cream. I want one so bad is what I wrote. Flying saucer ice cream sandwich.
They took credit for inventing the ice cream sandwich. Back in the ring, the Hollywood Blondes versus Paul Warner and Tony Diamanto.
Oh my God. Paul Warner. What I wrote is they just gave us a 6'6" bag of milk wearing green and yellow tights. And that is the only way to describe Paul Warner. He is lanky. His body undulates like a Jell-O commercial. And he's wearing green and yellow. You have never seen someone look more like a jobber. Just imagine a 6'6" guy looking whatever the opposite is of intimidating. Like it's amazing that someone could be this tall and lack any sort of physical stature or be imposing at all.
So the Hollywood Blondes have been paid off by Percy Pringle. Instead, it's the missing link in a handicap match here.
And I love how Percy, he doesn't even try to hide it. He says, there will be no Hollywood Blondes. I just paid them off.
He leaps up and down. He headbutts everyone.
Missing link, by the way. I wish it was Percy Pringle doing it.
Yes, I'm talking about the missing link.
He's in the ring with his black boots, black trunks, crazy jacked. He's got his wild hair, his green paint, and he is just dismantling these men. And as he's doing so, another layer in Percy Pringle is revealed as really this next comment. He sounds as though he may have been the inspiration for Alexandra York to start the York Foundation. Here in 1985, he says, my computer bank is full of information of wrestlers all over the world, and the missing link was at the top of all our surveys. Is Missing Link the computerized man of the 1980s?
Who knew?
Is he the spiritual forerunner to Terrence Taylor, the tailor-made man?
A power slam by Missing Link, more headbutts to his downed opponent, Paul Warner. Link hits his own head with a chair.
A wooden chair, like the Remember, like, was it Kevin Sullivan that broke the wooden chair over Ming's head in WCW, and that iconic moment where then Ming is, screaming violently while he's got the chair wrapped around his head? Maybe it was Dusty that put that over his head. I don't know, but this was like that, except for he was doing it to himself.
Yeah, he hits his own head with the chair. Then he headbutts Warner. He breaks the wood chair with his own head. He goes to the top rope for a headbutt off the top for the win.
That's a bit of a generous description. It was a flying splash, a flying headbutt. He just jumped off the top and landed on the man with his body.
Pringle on the apron is dancing with excitement.
Yes,
literally
strutting would not be a strong enough word to describe this. He is dancing. He is cutting a rug here on the apron, and it is every bit as incredible as you would imagine.
Gordon Solie recaps what we just saw,
including saying that, quote, "The missing link is strange."
And he
accurate and understated.
And he says, "So long from the Sunshine State." This was such a delightful show. I enjoyed this from start to finish. This is what I want in, an 80s territorial wrestling show, especially one I've never seen before, in a territory I've never seen before. This was Florida Championship Wrestling would have been my favorite wrestling, I think.
Yes. This was, it highlighted all the strengths of this format of professional wrestling television. When you have, the cream of the crop as far as Gordon Solie directing and guiding the entire show, guiding the viewers through it, having that booth there, the broadcast booth, where it's the center of action. Yes, you have a ring and you have short matches, but everything happens around that. You get a great, arrival with Percy Pringle, and then everything with him throughout the show. You also got the greatness of, incredible wrestlers and promo guys like Ric Flair, but then you also had, what happens when you have a guy who isn't charismatic and can't talk, and he's out there in that high wire act of, live to tape TV, and he's only got bullet points. He doesn't have a script that he's reviewed for, the last half hour before he went out there, that being Jesse Barr. This was, like you said, this is everything I loved about the type of pro wrestling television I grew up on.
So usually this is where we talk about our favorite thing on the show, and I don't think we can limit it. I think we have to say our favorite. I'm going to say my favorite things on this show were, like we just mentioned, everything with Percy Pringle, everything about Rick Rude, everything about Ric Flair, and everything about Gordon Solie. I think those are my favorite things on this show.
Yes, and if it absolutely had to boil it down to one thing, to me, it would be everything on the tarmac at the airport from the moment that Rick Rude got out.
The boss man's arrival, the reveal of the boss man.
And him trying to get out from that tiny little cargo hold of that tiny little plane, he being Percy Pringle. The highlight of the show from an in-ring standpoint, I mean, the matches were nothing other than Ric Flair and against the future Barry Horowitz, but that was, for what it was, that was an awesome little TV match. And Flair was, just parachuting in here. Flair was working as hard as he possibly could. And Jack Hart was more than up to the task. So yes, this was great. I really don't have anything bad to say about it. Clearly the worst thing on the show was Jesse Barr.
Sure.
But he was so bad. And the contrast between him and the real stars on this show, like Ric Flair, was so great that it entertained me. Honorable mention for best thing on this show, though, has to be the commercials.
The commercials were fabulous. And one other worst thing on the show has to be Dutch Mantel's choice to have tons of body hair and those gross suspenders with it. Absolutely unacceptable as well. But no, Jesse Barr, by far the worst thing on the show. Those commercials were fantastic. The whole show was great. We're nitpicking around here because for just a random show, this was a random
1 hour wrestling TV show.
This was great. You can do worse. This was absolutely worth going out of your way to see, especially if you, like us, were not as familiar with the work of Percy Pringle in 1985. Go and treat yourself.
I would agree wholeheartedly. This I've used this phrase a few times, but I don't think it's ever been more apt than on this show. This was a time capsule of 1985, near end of territory style wrestling, but still, like, this was so much more vibrant than, say, 2.5 years later, that World Class 87 show, which was just, a company on death's door. Even though we weren't that far removed from when Championship Wrestling from Florida would go away, it still felt like a thriving promotion here, at least on TV watching it.
Make sure you go to wrestlingatrandom.com to get all the links to our social media. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at WrestleAtRandom. That is where every single Thursday we're going to tell you what this Sunday's show is going to cover on the free feed. And every single Thursday, we're also posting to the bonus content on the Patreon. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. If you sign up there, you can get the bonus content, bonus shows every single Thursday. So you are getting free content on Sunday. You're getting your paid content on Thursdays. And we cover a ton of stuff. And if we're not covering something you want us to, Patreon's the place to go for that as well. You can request via Patreon what you'd like us to review as well. So make sure that if you can't support us financially, though, you are telling your wrestling fan friends about us. Tell your friends who used to be wrestling fans about us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure you tell your former friends who may be wrestling fans, tell them about us. Spread the word. We can never guarantee that we will reunite your friendships, but who knows? Maybe we will. I will go out on the limb and say that if you share this show, particularly the Percy Pringle segments, if you get your friend,
you'll find
your former friend, I should say, to watch this and then listen to this podcast, that may just bring you back together. If anything can mend fences, it's the Pringle dynasty.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to make sure that you interact with the show. If you have other Percy Pringle segments that we need to go out of our way to see, make sure you tell us about it via Twitter, again, at WrestleAtRandom, or you can send us an email if you're not on Twitter, because it can be a cesspool. I get it. Send us an email to interact with the show then, wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. The word you used to describe the show was perfect. It was delightful.
It absolutely was. This podcast was also delightful. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.